A giant aircraft stands on the tarmac at Marseille in France. It's been taken over by hijackers who are preparing the worst terrorist atrocity the world has so far seen. The men are heavily armed and carrying powerful explosives. The French Prime Minister faces a terrible dilemma. Storm the plane, lose 173 passengers and crew. But let it take off, and there'll be an even bigger price to pay. This will become a blueprint for defeating a terrorist hijacking. With eyewitness testimony and video recordings, this is the inside story of the hijacking the world forgot. It's Christmas Eve 1994. An Air France jet is on final approach to Algiers airport. It's the early morning flight from Paris to this former French colony on the north coast of Africa. The plane is an Airbus A300 with a crew of 12 on board.
3 greens.
This is no ordinary landing. Algeria is in a state of civil war. The area around the airport has been the scene of fierce fighting. There's a very real threat of missiles being fired at the plane as it comes in to land.
The flights to Algiers are only done by volunteers because of the terrorist threat. We're all aware of it. We accept the risk.
So dangerous is it that Air France, the French state airline, has asked its government if it really needs to continue these flights to Algiers. So far, there's been no reply.
100 feet. 50 feet. 20 feet. Leader thrust engage.
The captain of Air France Flight 8969 is Bernard Delem, a highly experienced pilot. This is his first ever television interview. The events are still so threatening to him that he'll only appear in silhouette.
There were some security measures, like on any other flight, and a few extra ones since we were in Algiers. But at my level, I had no qualms about flying there. Even now, 10 years later, I can still say that I like doing in Algiers.
The plane will only be on the ground for the short time it takes to clean, refuel, and board the passengers for the return flight. They're mostly Algerians, but many are French, escaping for a while the perils of life in Algeria. 3 years earlier, Islamic fundamentalists had won the elections there, hoping to install an Islamic state. But then the military seized power and imprisoned their leaders. Since then, Algeria has descended into chaos.
Like every other year, I decided to come and spend the holidays in France, and I had a cousin with me. I was chief stewardess at Air Algeria, and I wouldn't take any other flight but Air Algeria normally. But when I arrived at the airport, there were no seats left. The flight was full. But an Air France booking agent suggested that I take the Air France flight. So I did. At least I'd be certain of taking off.
Boarding is nearly over, but then, another sign of the fraught security situation, police board the plane for one more check.
Presidential police, you two take the rear. Police, nobody move, please. Presidential police, we're carrying out an identity check. All right. No, you stay here, we'll handle it.
It'd be best if I made an announcement.
Okay, go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, good day. This is your captain speaking. There will be a short delay while the police will come to their cabin to carry out a passport check. Please remain seated. We apologize for the inconvenience. We should be on our way shortly.
Passport. Passport.
When they came towards us, they were armed. And that's really unusual.
Passports, please.
This unauthorized delay to Flight 8969 is making the military suspicious. Algerian special forces, known as the Ninjas, are already heading towards the plane.
I looked outside and I could see the ninjas out there, the Algerian special forces. I said to myself, why are there so many of them? Tarout means infidels. And when he said that, I knew straight away that they were terrorists. There it was.
All of you, get to the back! Hurry! Shut that voice of Satan! Sit down! You two, don't move! Nobody move!
We are not the police. We are Mujahideen.
The men are not police, but terrorists. They belong to a violent group of Muslim extremists. They aim to force an Islamic State on Algeria, no matter what it takes. And seizing the plane is part of that plan.
Inshallah!
When that happened, it was like a rock falling. Like lead. I don't know which. It was horrifying.
Look at this! This is a very powerful bomb! There are others just like it! Ready for a great fireworks show in the sky! We are the Mujahideen of the people! God has chosen us to die, and you to die with us!
The leader, 25-year-old Abdullah Yahya, is a notorious killer.
There is nothing to fear! God awaits us all in his heavenly paradise!
Outside, news spreads quickly, and reporters arrive at the scene. In Paris, the French Prime Minister is urgently recalled from his Christmas holiday. It's an international crisis.
I spent the whole afternoon on the phone trying to find out exactly what was going on. It was pretty confused. The Algerian authorities were determined to get tough, and it was difficult to discuss the problem with them.
Give me your jacket, Captain.
Back in Algiers, the terrorists decide to put on the flight crew's uniforms to confuse any army snipers. Meanwhile, in the cabin, one of the terrorists is not happy with what he sees.
Cover your head! Cover your head more! You too!
Their Islamic customs were not being respected. Men and women sharing the same toilets, sitting next to each other. And above all, women with their heads uncovered. That was intolerable for Lotfi, and it threw him into a rage. Lotfi's character is very peculiar. We called him the madman because really he was always on a knife edge. He had fits of rage. He was always on the brink of fury. What he saw there in the cabin was intolerable for him. He had to cover these women up.
Now, 2 hours into the hijacking, the terrorists want to talk to the Algerian military.
You in the tower! We have taken control of this Air France flights. We are the armed Islamic group. Do you hear me? Do you understand? Do you hear me? What is wrong with this thing? They don't hear me.
They couldn't hear you because you both talked at the same time. You have to start again.
You tell them. Do it.
Air France 8969. What do you want me to say?
The terrorists order Captain Delem to take off for Paris. They say they're going to hold a press conference there. But the plane can't move. The passenger boarding stairs are still attached, and the Algerian authorities have parked vehicles to block the runways.
Air France 8969. The passenger boarding stairs are still in place. Please remove them immediately.
They meet with a blank refusal. Things are starting to go wrong for the hijackers. The Algerian strategy is not to give way on a single point, but it's a dangerous policy, as they are soon to find out.
We are going to blow up the world! We are going to blow up the plane and everyone in it! Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Armed terrorists have hijacked an Air France jet at Algiers airport. They want to leave for Paris, but the government won't let them. It's a stalemate, for the moment.
I'll say it one more time. Please remove the boarding stairs so that we can leave for Paris.
You think we are joking? We will show you how we are joking. We are soldiers of God. We are ready to die. We will show them.
The terrorists are about to send a message to the Algerian government. During the passport check, they've identified among the passengers an officer of the Algerian police.
Then 2 rows behind me, there was a policeman.
Can you come with us, please? We need your help.
He asked the policeman to follow him. It's crazy, I don't know if he knew, but he was very hesitant. He was walking, but reluctantly, because he didn't know what was going to happen to him.
Open the door, please. So please take our message to the government.
Few passengers are aware of the murder, nor are the pilots.
The first contact we were allowed with the cabin was when a stewardess was allowed into the cockpit to see if we wanted anything. I said, we'd like a glass of water, because it was hard to swallow, as you can imagine. Our throats were very dry. Just then, she whispered to me, they've already killed a passenger. I was dumbfounded because we had no idea. We'd heard nothing.
But the passengers are growing more concerned about what's going on outside. There are signs that the Algerian Special Forces are preparing for an armed assault.
The biggest worry that we all had was that the ninjas, the Algerian Special Forces, would attack the plane. Things were going on inside the plane, sure, but anything that would come from the outside would upset things, and that scared us.
As French Interior Minister at the time, Charles Pasqua knows exactly how the ninjas operate.
They were trained by us. We were taking a considerable risk by letting this plane stay in Algiers, because we knew that although the Algerian forces were perfectly capable of ending the siege, it would have ended in a bloodbath.
The Algerian military maintain their hard line, so the terrorists are about to raise the stakes again. Another passenger must die.
When they came for the second passenger, we knew things were going wrong. This passenger, he was different. He was Vietnamese, a diplomat. He was the real foreigner on this plane. This passenger was not cowed by their terror, and that must have bothered them.
The Vietnamese diplomat believes that as an outsider, he's being released.
The stewardess went back to the cabin and came back with a bottle of water and some glasses. She served us and whispered, it's not 1 now, it's 2. Immediately, I realized that we had really hit the jackpot.
As the hours go by, the crew and passengers begin to recognize the different personalities of the 4 men.
To make things simpler, we gave them names. Yaya gave us his name straight away, so that was easy. He was in charge. He looked a little bit like a student. He was friendly enough, very calm, except when he flew into a rage, and then he would act like a gangster. Lotfi, the madman, was the one who insisted we follow their laws, the one who was the most fanatic, the most fundamentalist. He'd already been in prison and been tortured. He had a hatred of the government, and he had a very short fuse. He was the dangerous one, the real psychopath. The third one didn't have a name. We called him Bill. He was a little bit simple. You wondered what he was doing there. And you could see him wondering the same thing. It was an error in casting. He was more of a goat herd than a terrorist. Then, finally, there was the killer. It was he who did the shooting, and who cleaned his gun afterwards without any remorse or feeling. I wonder if he knew what he was doing.
The killer in the group is becoming increasingly bizarre.
The tallest one, the killer, when we passed each other on the plane, he would take me by the neck and kiss me on the forehead. And later on, the meaning of this was more or less confirmed to me. People told me that this could be seen as the kiss of death.
Finally, Morin plucks up enough courage to voice his fears.
Can I say something? I want to ask you a favor. If you decide to kill me, I want you to promise me. I don't want to be killed by a bullet in the back, because when I die, I want to be able to see your face.
What are you afraid of?
Well, it's impossible not to be afraid with what's going on the plane.
You don't need to worry. Because if I kill you, you will be a martyr. You will go straight to paradise.
I can tell you that it didn't make me feel any better.
In Algiers, it's stalemate. Neither side is giving way. In Paris, the French leaders are frustrated. They believe their own special forces could bring the hijacking to a safe end. But the Algerians refuse to let foreign troops in to sort out an Algerian problem.
I asked the Algerian authorities extremely forcefully and urgently to let the plane take off, because I considered that it was a French plane belonging to Air France, which, although it had on board a majority of Algerians, had dozens of French there too. So it was for us to solve the problem.
Night falls. Air France Flight 8969 is pinned down by spotlights. The passengers have now been held hostage for 7 hours. Initial panic has given way to a tense calm. Few realize that 2 passengers have been murdered. The crew is working hard to defuse the situation.
All these buttons, like here, for instance, it's the APU, auxiliary power unit.
The role of a crew in these conditions is to keep things calm, to earn trust, to keep things going, which is very important. At the start of a hostage-taking, it's always violent. You have to buy time, to calm people, to show what you're like, to find out who they are, and so on. And then try to gain their trust.
There was the conversion to Islam of 2 stewardesses, of whom I was one. It was a request from the terrorists. I don't have any disrespect for believers, but if it could help calm the terrorists down, then I didn't have any problem faking a conversion.
We are going to blow up the world! We are going to blow up the plane and everyone in it! Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Through the night, the threats and ultimatums continue. But the Algerian government will not give in. It's a battle of wills.
At one point, it was quite calm. I made a tour of the cabin about 2 in the morning. There were 2 of them lying on the floor, between door 1 left and door 1 right. I thought, Look, 2 of them are asleep, one's at the rear, there's only one in the cockpit. If an assault took place now, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. But that's as far as it went.
After a restless night, the passengers wake up. It's Christmas morning.
It was a marvelous gesture. There was one person we called Father Christmas because he said, "You've worked hard enough, now it's my turn." And he took round all the bottles of water and glasses to the passengers. The passengers joined in. That's to say, they tried to eat something, to do normal things, to make the atmosphere a little bit more normal and a little less stressful than it really was. It was the waiting, because in reality, we could do nothing but wait.
During the night, the French government has decided to send its special forces to the island of Majorca, as close to Algeria as possible without being accused of interfering. Colonel Denis Favier was then a major in charge of the French counter-terrorist unit, the GIGN. Since the hijacking, it's feared that terrorists have put a price on his head, and he doesn't want his face to be seen.
The decision was taken to send GIGN to Majorca. An Air France aircraft was put at our disposal, identical in every respect to the hijacked aircraft, as well as an experienced crew who knew the technical side, all the details of the plane.
En route to Majorca, Major Favier's men have familiarized themselves with every detail of the A300 Airbus, in the expectation that they will get the chance to attack the plane. Back in Algiers, the terrorists release some passengers, mainly women with young children or people with serious medical conditions. But there are still over 170 people on board, a handful for the 4 young terrorists. And the passengers are not who they thought they would be.
I don't know how the terrorists organized their business. They certainly put a lot of thought into it. They obviously wanted to seize a symbol of France, and Air France is a national symbol. But perhaps they didn't realize that in an Air France plane at Algiers, most of the passengers would be Algerians.
138 of the passengers are Algerian citizens. The terrorists offer to release them, leaving only the French nationals on board. A gruesome indication, perhaps, of their final plan. However, the Algerian passengers refuse to leave.
It's true that in Algiers they were going to free some of the passengers, and they refused to get off. I think that one of them said, "If we leave, then afterwards they're going to kill the crew, so I'm going to stay." I think that this man was sincere. I can't explain it, but it was the truth.
The Algerian government has another trick up its sleeve. They've managed to identify the terrorist leader, Yahya, and bring his mother to the microphone to try to weaken her son's resolve.
Ma! Ma! I love you, but I love God more!
The Algerian government's tactic misfires. It sends Yahya into a boiling rage.
They went and got my mother. Can you imagine that? My mother! They went and dragged my mother over here! How many French are back there?
1 man and woman.
Go get the man. What do they think they're playing at? What do they think they're doing?
He was furious. He had no intention of changing his mind. Even the love of his mother, even his mother couldn't do anything.
Until now, the terrorists haven't targeted any French citizens. But their time has come. 2 staff members of the French embassy are on board, a secretary and a young chef.
Okay, now we will teach you how to play games with us. Are you listening to me? You tell them that if they don't let the plane take off, we will kill every single passenger one by one. Tell them.
My name is Yannick Beignet. I work at the embassy. They're threatening to kill us. If you do nothing, they'll start the executions. You've got to do something, and quickly. Quick as you can.
We care nothing for you. We are soldiers of God. We'll kill him and we'll throw him outside the door. You can come and pick him up.
Get me a magazine.
He was terrified, Yannick. He was looking at me, but he was terrified. Was he pleading with me to help him? Was he?
You two, we better off going back to your places. Go!
I was saying to myself, no, it's not possible. It can't happen like this. It's not possible.
The door-open warning light confirms that the terrorists have carried out their threat.
Air France 8969.
You happy now? See what you get when you play tough.
On a assisté à distance.
We witnessed at a distance the execution of this man.
C'est quelque chose qui a été qu'on avait vécu.
It was something we lived through with great emotion in Paris, because we were patched into the conversations between the plane and the control tower.
The French government can no longer stand by and do nothing. Prime Minister Balladur gets on the phone and threatens his Algerian counterpart.
I told him that I would hold the Algerian government responsible for what happened and make it known to international opinion.
Balladur's threat works. The Algerian president caves in. Finally, after 39 hours of terror, Flight 8969 can leave for France.
Just then, there it was. We could leave. In the plane, there was a joy you could not imagine. And really, this impression that that was it. We'd succeeded. We had all succeeded and we were going to be saved. We were leaving Algiers.
But there's a problem. All the time they've been on the ground, the captain has kept the auxiliary power unit running. It's a small jet engine in the tail of the plane which keeps the power supply going. It uses around 4 tons of fuel a day. Now there isn't enough to reach Paris. Only Marseille on the southern coast of France.
Navigation lights. On. Air conditioning packs.
Flight 8969 prepares to take off. The crew are relieved to be going home. Both they and the passengers believe that whatever the future holds, it can't be as bad as what they're leaving behind. They don't realize the horror that awaits them. After 2 days of terror and the death of 3 passengers, the Algerian authorities are allowing Flight 8969 to leave for France. The terrorists say they're going to hold a press conference there.
Before takeoff checklist completed.
But Captain Delem wants an urgent word with the terrorist leader.
What is it? What's wrong?
Look, since the start of this whole thing, I followed your instructions. You want to get to Paris to talk to the journalists. I'll take you there. But I want to know if you're going to blow up the plane between Algiers and Marseille.
Why do you ask if I'm going to blow up the plane?
Because the responsibility for these passengers is on my shoulders.
No, there's nothing to worry about for you or the passengers. We fly to Marseille, like you said, refuel the tanks, and then we go to Paris. I give you my word.
All right.
Good. Let's go.
Me, I believed them when they told me that the plane would not be blown up between Algiers and Marseille. I don't know if they would have given me the same answer between Marseille and Paris. When someone's got explosives, they're not for making a birthday cake.
We have 2 terrorists strapped in their seats in the cockpit, and they're so excited. They're like kids, excited, happy. What's more, they'd succeeded.
At 3:30 in the morning on the 26th of December, the plane approaches Marseille airport. They're unaware that Major Denis Favier and his French special forces have got there ahead of them from Mallorca and are now planning a showdown.
Normally you arrive on ground that's held by the enemy. But here it's the enemy who is going to arrive on ground where you are in total control. And that's a key element in the success of the operation.
50 feet. 20 feet.
For the terrorists, it's the magic moment. We are landing in France. We'll get fuel. We'll get provisions to take off again and go to Paris, because that's the objective. The airport is very dark. There are the lights of the plane and the little car, the Follow Me car, which we follow, and we do not go to the terminal.
The plane is being deliberately led away to a remote corner of the airfield. Tension is very high because the French government has received some alarming news.
While the plane was flying towards France, we received other information, according to which the terrorists planned to use the plane to carry out an attack on Paris. The information was credible, and we took it seriously. So the decision was made that no matter what, the plane would not take off from Marseille. No matter how high the price may be, the plane would not take off. We picked a very precise spot for the plane to park, and then we just played for time.
The French tactics will now be dictated by Major Favier. His plan is to wear the terrorists down. Whilst always appearing conciliatory, the French will spin out negotiations as long as possible. They know that Yahya and his men must be tired. The hijacking has now gone on for almost 2 days.
Air France 8969, we require immediate refueling.
27 tons!
27 tons.
The terrorists have learned from the flight crew that 27 tons of fuel will fill the tanks, far more than the 9 tons needed for the journey to Paris. It appears to confirm the intelligence report that the plane is to be used as a firebomb.
They say it's not possible because of the killings, because of what happened in Algiers. It's in all the papers. The workers who do the refueling are afraid. They won't come near the plane.
Tell them we want to go now. We'll do a press conference in Paris.
Air France 8969, they want to leave for Paris right away. They wish to hold a press conference in Paris. You say, why go to Paris while all the international press has come here to Marseille? They're all here. Why do a press conference in Paris? There's no point. We can do it here on the plane.
Major Favier has baited the hook. Will Yahya bite?
Tell them we want CNN. Tell them we want CNN.
Air France 8969, they want to speak to CNN.
The terrorists agree to a press conference aboard the plane, little realizing that it's all part of a clever plan.
Tactically, this press conference was important because it enabled us to get some of the passengers moved to the rear of the plane.
The negotiators asked that the front of the plane be cleared for the press conference. The real reason is to create a clear area for the French special forces when they storm the plane. Because what the terrorists don't realize is that the plane's doors can be opened from the outside.
Are they coming?
No, not yet.
By now, the plane has been sitting on Marseille's taxiway for 12 hours. The French special forces know how many terrorists there are and where they are. It's believed the French special forces planted microphones on the fuselage of the plane. Now they're waiting for the sun to go down to take advantage of the dark. On the plane, they know nothing of this. They're still waiting for the press to arrive.
Tower 8969. Everything's ready here. You can send the press now. 8969, what do you mean they're not ready?
No.
You said they were ready over an hour ago and you were going to get them. Come on, there's not much time left. There must be hundreds of journalists there. This will be the biggest scoop of their careers.
They're up to something. We can't stay here.
I assure you, it's...
Captain, move the plane over there.
I promise you, we'll be...
Captain, move it right now. Do it. Move the plane over there where the other ones are.
We'll be fine. I promise.
Move the planes! Go over there where the other ones are! Do it! Do it!
Let's go. Start engines.
Suddenly, all Colonel Favier's plans are in disarray. Yahya, the terrorist leader, now has the initiative.
Tactically for us, the situation was very bad. Our positions were based on the plane being parked at point A, and all of a sudden it's at point B. So we have to reorganize very quickly.
Captain Delem is forced to park right at the foot of the tower, close to the terminal and other flights. If they blow up the plane now, the casualties could be enormous.
Tell them it's too late now! There won't be a press conference, it's too late, it should have been done! Tell them to fill the tanks! We're leaving! They have until 5 o'clock, at 5 o'clock, we're taking off! Tell them, Captain, do it! I've had it, do it!
Air France 8969.
Major Favier is having his men picked up as fast as possible to move to new positions. He puts snipers on the terminal roof, where they'll have a view of the cockpit. He only has a few minutes to set up his emergency plan, a cavalry charge of passenger boarding stairs.
3 air stairs and 30 men. This is the plan. Penetrate by the 2 rear doors, with 2 teams of 11 men each at the rear right and rear left doors, and then a penetration by a smaller team of 8 men at the front right door to gain control of the cockpit, since we know that the terrorist leader is in the cockpit. Our intention is to cut off the cockpit from the rest of the plane.
By 5 o'clock, no fuel has been delivered. The authorities have no intention of allowing the plane to take off.
5 o'clock comes round, and there, it's the moment when Yahya has to do something.
Yahya enters the cabin to choose his 4th victim, but he seems reluctant.
He chooses a member of the crew, the youngest, the most foreign, who had made the mistake of telling him he was an atheist.
I don't want to do this. But I got no choice.
I don't know what was going on in Yahya's head, and we never will. I don't know if he changed his mind, but he kept putting off this execution. So instead of that, he fired on everything around.
The hijackers know they are in the endgame.
But then they discovered there was a public address and they started reciting verses from the Quran. It was very difficult because it was the prayers for the dead. We had to prepare ourselves for death. We were going to die as martyrs. God was waiting for us. There was silence, and all of a sudden it was a state of panic.
The terrorists know the French negotiators are in the control tower. They decide to send them a message.
One of the terrorists opened the side window of the cockpit and hosed down the control tower. The glass shattered all around us. We were literally machine gunned.
Since we had landed in Marseille, there had been some moments of tension, but nothing like what seemed to be about to happen.
We're gonna succeed in our mission, Captain. Don't worry about that.
Major Favier has been given carte blanche by the French Prime Minister Edouard Balladur. He decides the moment has come to act.
When the terrorists started firing with an automatic weapon on the tower, there was danger inside the plane, so we now had justification for an armed attack. That attack was carried out from the air stairs, which are mobile vehicles.
They're coming! The Taru are coming!
At that moment, everybody understood, them and us, that it was the beginning of the assault.
The cavalry charge is underway. This is actual footage of the attack.
There are 8 of us on the front right air stair. The first air stair gets to the aircraft. There's a small problem with the height, as it was a little bit higher than the door. The door hits the top of the air stair, a slight step back, the door opens, the air stair touches the plane, and the group goes in.
Then it's the apocalypse.
Get down! Get down!
And then the group that has gone in comes under a deluge of fire from the terrorists who shoot at everyone who enters, an extremely murderous fire. There's not a moment's doubt about the nature of this gunfire. They are shooting to kill.
At the rear of the plane, the other 2 squads of Favier's men enter.
So I hear, hands on your head, don't move, hide, get down as low as you can. I just wished to escape. The situation we were in was extremely violent, so I pulled the overcoat I had over my head so I wouldn't see the tracer bullets whizzing past, nor what was going on around.
Hundreds of bullets are whistling through the cabin. Grenades are exploding. There's smoke and confusion everywhere.
I was in a rather bad spot, so I tried to make myself as small as possible. You stop breathing, and you imagine that you're hard enough to stop the bullets.
The snipers on the terminal roof can see the terrorists in the cockpit, but frustratingly can't get a clear shot. The co-pilot is blocking their view. But that problem is about to be solved. Actual video footage shows the co-pilot, Jean-Paul Borderie, falling onto the hard concrete. Yet he still manages to stagger away to safety. It gives the snipers the chance they've been waiting for. At the rear of the cabin, the French Special Forces is evacuating the passengers through a hail of gunfire. But cabin steward Christophe Morin finds himself unable to escape.
I tried to take with me a woman, a passenger who had been sitting next to me, but she was too fat, she could not come. So we just held hands.
Unbelievably, only a few minutes after the assault began, most of the passengers have been rescued. By now, only 1 terrorist is left alive, but he's going down fighting.
There was only the flight engineer and me left in the cockpit. We looked at each other, and there's just this one terrorist. He looks at us, one after the other. His 3 colleagues are here, dead or nearly so. Out of spite, he could have killed both of us. He didn't. What more can I say?
I think that after 54 hours, there is mutual recognition and respect, quote-unquote, between the terrorists and the hostages. Yes, bonds were created in this drama. And I think these bonds were activated, and that they perhaps contributed to saving the lives of some members of the crew.
The French news footage captures amazing scenes of the battle. A GIGN man is blasted out of the plane by gunshots. The final surviving terrorist holds them at bay for almost 20 minutes, but his time and his ammunition are running out.
The flight engineer and I looked at each other. We knew exactly the situation we were in. As long as there were gunshots, we knew we could die. But once it stopped, or when we thought it had stopped, then we said, all right, it's over.
But it's not over yet for the captain and his flight engineer. The GIGN are not sure who were the terrorists and how many are still alive. Everyone is suspect. The battle around the cockpit has been so fierce that everyone believes the flight crew are dead. The French special forces suspect that any survivors may be terrorists in disguise. The flight engineer is hustled off the plane and handcuffed.
Get up! Hands on your head.
I'm the captain of the plane. I will get out, but not with my hands on my head.
I would never have left the cockpit with my hands on my head. After all I have been through, I would not be punished like a child.
When we saw Bernard and Alain come out, we couldn't believe it. Alain was handcuffed and his shirt was covered in blood. He said, "I'm deaf, I'm deaf." But we said, "Yes, but you're alive." We told them, "He's our flight engineer, let him go." It was incredible.
For 20 minutes, the gun battle has raged on board the crowded aircraft. Hundreds of shots have been fired, numerous grenades exploded. Yet all 173 passengers and crew have survived. Captain Delem himself escaped with bullet wounds to his right elbow and thigh.
The crew had a specific responsibility, the duty to save the hostages and to safeguard the plane. The crew in general and the captain in particular, they all rose to the occasion.
9 of the 30 GIGN men have been wounded, 1 seriously.
When I assessed the gravity of the GIGN men's injuries, and when we learned that none were fatal, then yes, I could consider that the operation overall had been a success.
Out of the 161 passengers who survived the hijacking, only a few have suffered slight injuries. A huge relief to the French Prime Minister.
I cannot say that I was calm that day, but I considered that there was no other decision to be made than the one I took. So the only thing that was left for me was to hope that things would unfold well. And as a matter of fact, they unfolded exceptionally well. I would not have dreamed that they would go that well.
All the French special forces and the crew members received high national honors for their courage.
For a long time, I kept seeing the faces of the 3 dead passengers that I couldn't save. Then, when the time of the medals came, I realized that I had helped save 170 people. It's a lot more gratifying, and it allowed me to mourn and get over it. I don't wear the medal, but I'm proud of having it, and I consider that we deserved it. We only did what we were supposed to, our job.
It was a textbook mission, one of the most successful anti-terrorist operations ever carried out. But the traumatic experience will never leave the survivors. Zahida Kakachi, the passenger, could not stay in Algeria. She became so anxious about her safety, she emigrated to France. Stewardess Claude Bernard was thanked by Air France, but never worked for them again. Christophe Morin suffered the same fate. Since this horrific experience, his outlook on life has changed radically. He now works for a charitable organization. Captain Delem eventually returned to flying duties. After a further 9 years of service, he's recently retired from Air France. Later, a former leader of the Algerian terrorist groups, Omar Chiki, confirmed that the plan had been to blow up the plane over the Eiffel Tower, the symbol of the French nation. Hundreds might have been killed when the plane crashed down onto the crowded streets of Paris. They never tried again, and the world would forget this hijacking until 7 years later.
I went to do some shopping and I bumped into a friend who said a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. I went home and stayed sitting in front of the television for 24 hours. I couldn't move or eat or do anything. All those images came back to me, and I asked myself, is that what was supposed to happen to us?
I was convinced that the terrorists wanted to crash the plane over Paris. To them, it would have been a great feat. Crashing a plane on the Eiffel Tower or the Élysée Palace would be an extraordinary feat.
Above all, I kept thinking, we had apprentice terrorists, boys who didn't understand very well what they were doing. But voila, they taught everyone a lesson.
Pull down and turn to your right. If you force it, you'll break it. This won't come out, Bob. Push the switch forward.
A single light bulb is preventing a modern jetliner from landing.
Screwing around with a 20-cent piece of light equipment on this plane.
Struggling to fix a minor problem, a much more serious one develops.
We're still at 2,000, man.
Hey, what's happening here?
The plane crashes in a remote swamp. Those who survived the crash face a new danger. The swamp has filled with jet fuel.
No one light a match!
Eastern 401 was a pivotal accident in aviation history.
The crash would point investigators to an astonishing danger lurking in all commercial cockpits. December 29th, 1972, the dawn of the jumbo jet era. On its way to Florida, this L-1011 TriStar is the most advanced passenger jet in the world.
The Lucky TriStar was a fascinating bird. It was a beautifully flying airplane. It had a tremendous amount of power and a lot of innovation to it.
The cabin of this Eastern Airlines jet is large and quiet. The service is first-rate. Bob Loft is the captain for Eastern Airlines Flight 401. He's been with the airline for more than 30 years. His first officer is Albert Stockstill. His second officer is Donald Repo. The jet has left the bitter cold of New York behind and is now descending towards Miami.
Welcome to Miami. The temperature's in the low 70s, and it's a beautiful night out there tonight. Go ahead and throw them out.
Angelo Donadeo is an off-duty Eastern Airlines maintenance expert. He's catching a ride back to Miami. There are 176 people on board tonight's flight. Most are heading south for New Year's. Ron and Lily Infantino have been married for only 20 days. They've just spent Christmas with his family.
The seatbelt sign came on as normal. We're in a final approach. I look out the window there, and I could see lights at the airport.
Close to midnight, the plane begins its approach to Miami International Airport. Stockstill flies the plane, while Repo performs a landing checklist.
Radar. Up. Off. Hydraulic panels checked. 35, 33. Gear down.
The captain notices a problem.
Bird, is that handling?
No nose gear.
The light showing that the nose gear is locked hasn't lit up.
I'm gonna raise it back up.
The gear might not be all the way down. Loft tries again. The sound of the landing gear echoes through the plane.
It makes a pretty loud grinding noise. If you've flown very much, you're familiar with that sound. So they did that several times. The pilots did that several times, and we weren't alarmed. It's just one of those things that happens sometimes, and we just kind of looked at each other and said, great, we're gonna be late getting home.
Still no light. Loft isn't sure if his front landing gear is locked. If it isn't, landing could be disastrous.
Tower, this is Easton 401. Looks like we're gonna have to circle. We don't have a light on our nose gear yet.
Eastern 401 Heavy, roger. Pull up, climb straight ahead to 2000. Go back to approach control, 128.6.
You want me to test the lights or not?
Yeah, check it.
Flight engineer Repo performs a test nicknamed the Christmas tree. It lights up every warning light in the cockpit to see if the bulbs are working. The nose gear indicator light fails the test. The bulb is probably burnt out. But there's a slim chance of a double failure. Both the light bulb and the landing gear could be broken.
Bob, could you just jiggle the light?
But the troublesome bulb is out of the captain's reach. On the ground, air traffic control directs Flight 401 to climb to 2,000 feet and circle away from the airport until the problem is solved.
You want me to fly, bro?
What frequency did he want us on board?
128.6.
I'll talk to him.
It's right above that red one, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't get at it from here.
Wow. Yeah, I can't make a pull out either.
It's a moonless night. As the plane veers away from Miami, there's total darkness outside.
All of a sudden, it turned pitch dark again. And that means we were going back out west towards the Everglades.
Co-pilot Stockstill is flying the plane, but Captain Loft needs his help to solve the problem.
Put the autopilot on here.
The TriStar is equipped with the most sophisticated autopilot in history. It actually has the ability to land the plane on its own. Stockstill programs it to fly at 2,000 feet.
Now, see if you can get that light out.
The light is finally removed. Richard Pragluski is an aviation engineer. He takes this flight regularly and can tell that the plane is experiencing technical problems.
He was heading out towards the Everglades. I knew there was something wrong with the plane because if you have a delay, they'll circle the plane.
The irritating problem isn't getting better. Now Stockstill can't get the light back in.
Now, push the switch just forward. Okay. You got it sideways then.
Eastern 401, turn left, heading 300.
Okay, 300, Eastern 401. Hey, get down there and see if that damn nose wheel is down.
The electronics bay on the plane is underneath the cockpit. The room, nicknamed the Hellhole, is a unique feature on wide-bodied jets. The front landing gear mechanism can be seen from there.
You got a handkerchief or something so I can get a little better grip on this?
Hold down and turn to your right.
Anything I can do it with?
Turn to your left one time.
Get down there and see if that damn
This
thing...
won't come out, Bob. If I had a pair of pliers, I could cushion it with that Kleenex.
I can give you a pair of pliers, but if you force it, you'll break it. Just believe me.
To hell with it, to hell with this! Get down and see if we're lined up with that red line. That's all we care. Screwing around with a 20-cent piece of light equipment on this plane.
As the crew struggles to fix the problem. In the cabin, Richard Pragluski sees something peculiar out of his window.
I could see a tower to my right in the distance, and it looked like we were going into a glide path, which I found very strange.
Pragluski has noticed something the pilots haven't. The plane is getting closer and closer to the swamp below. Eastern Airlines Flight 401 is flying over the Florida Everglades. Below it, nothing but a dark, deserted swamp. To passenger Richard Progluski, something doesn't seem right.
I felt it kind of strange that they hadn't made any announcements. But again, he was still fairly high off the ground. And I figured they would come out and tell us that when they were going to make the landing. So I wasn't overly concerned.
Put it in the wrong way, huh?
Looks square to me.
Can't you get the hole lined up?
I don't know what the hell's holding that damn thing in there. It's always something. We could have made schedule.
Without a green light, they still don't know if their landing gear is locked. Flight engineer Don Repo is now in the belly of the plane. There's a viewing window in the hellhole which should let him see if the front wheels are locked in place.
Damn.
I don't see it down there.
Huh?
I don't see it.
It's not lined up.
I can't see it. It's pitch dark, and I throw the little light and get nothing.
Wheel well lights on?
Pardon?
Wheel well lights. On?
Captain Loft has forgotten to turn on lights outside the plane that illuminate the landing gear.
Now try it.
At Miami International, controller Charlie Johnson has just finished dealing with another troubled jet.
National 607 has landed without incident. Fire trucks were deployed, but they weren't used.
He notices that Eastern Airlines Flight 401 seems to have dropped from 2,000 feet to 900. But he's not overly concerned. It's not unusual to get false readings for several radar sweeps in a row.
Eastern 401, how are things coming along out there?
Okay, we'd like to turn around and come back in.
Captain Loft believes that he'll soon get confirmation that his gear is locked. He wants to return to the airport.
Eastern 401, turn left, heading 180.
The plane is heading west, away from the airport. It will take several minutes to get lined up for the landing. Deep in the Everglades, Bob Marcus is hunting frogs with a friend. Eastern Airlines Flight 401 roars past.
I just saw the lights blinking across the sky, and it was so black. There's no horizon in the west, and you couldn't tell how high the plane was.
Suddenly, the pilots make an alarming observation.
We did something to the altitude?
What?
We're still at 2,000, right?
Hey, what's happening here?
I see the lights in the cabin just flickering on and off, and I heard a noise. It was a violent whipping sensation. Then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose.
Charlie Johnson notices that Flight 401's altitude now reads as coastal, or sea level.
Eastern 401, I've lost you on the radar there, your transponder. What's your altitude now?
There's no response from Eastern 401. Another plane makes a disturbing report.
Miami approaches this National 611. We just saw a big flash. Looked like it came out west. Don't know what it means, but wanted to let you know.
In a dark, remote swamp, those who survived the crash find themselves in a nightmare. Bob Marcus races towards the site of the crash.
Oh, I was going as fast as I could. It took me about 15 minutes, I think, to get to the crash site.
Remarkably, Richard Pregluski is alive.
I knew I was badly injured because I could see my clothes hanging from my body. I had almost no clothes on the upper half of the body, and I could see skin coming down my arms. And I also knew that when you're in shock, you feel no pain. So I knew I really was seriously injured, and I started thinking, I said, well, you know, the pain will come later, but how do I keep calm and get out of there, because the longer I'm in that swamp, the condition I'm in, the more danger I'm in.
When the plane crashed, a huge fireball tore through the cabin.
I remember that fire coming to my face. I remember the flash. I remember that I tried breathing, and I could not get my breath. Of course, the fire took all the oxygen out of the air. And that's the last thing I remember until I got up in the swamp itself.
Ron Infantino was knocked out by the crash. He wakes up in the swamp.
So I was thrown quite a bit. And I was away from Verizon or everybody else. Nobody was even near me.
Lily. Lily.
He's badly wounded. His new wife, Lily, was sitting next to him, but now she's nowhere to be seen. Swamp water doused the initial flames. But 20,000 kilograms of jet fuel has now leaked into the swamp. A single spark could start a deadly blaze.
No one light a match! We're covered in jet fuel.
What a sad thing to come through that crash and then have somebody do something stupid like strike a match and have us all just blow up. That was the real fear.
Hoping to help the survivors, Bob Marcus jumps into the swamp. He immediately feels the sting of the jet fuel on his skin.
It burnt my legs. I had to treat my legs for burns for about a week.
Marcus quickly spots a survivor who's in grave danger. The badly wounded man is still strapped to his seat. He's on the verge of drowning.
Had his head kept dropping down in the water. He came up, he said, help me. I can't hold my head up much longer, and then dropped back down in the water. So I helped him, I pulled him up.
Don't worry, I got you. I got you.
Bob Marcus saves dozens of lives, preventing many people from drowning. Isolated from the other survivors and unable to move, Ron Infantino now has a new reason to fear for his life.
After a while, the alligators and the snakes, you could hear them in the weeds coming by, and you could hear the croaking of the alligators because they started to come back to the natural habitat. And as far as I'm concerned, if a gator came up to me or a snake, I was dead meat because I couldn't defend myself at all. And then I heard Christmas caroling.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm.
To rally the survivors' spirits, Trudy Smith and others sing Christmas carols.
We knew instinctively that we weren't going to get out of there in a hurry because nobody knew where we were. In the middle of the swamp, midnight. So what else are you going to do?
And you got to picture us this, I mean, in the dark at night, or you hear us singing in the wilderness. It was like you're on the Titanic going down type of thing, you know? It was unbelievable.
Within minutes, Coast Guard helicopters are sent out in search of the crash site. But in the pitch-black night, they can't find the wreckage. Bob Marcus tries to signal the distant helicopters.
But I could see where they were, and they were going the wrong direction. And I just waved the light at them until I saw them turn and head back towards us.
It seemed like we'd been in the swamps for a really long time when we heard a helicopter, and it was such a welcoming sound because that means somebody knows that you're there.
Less than half an hour after the crash, the Coast Guard arrives. But the nearest landing site is 100 meters away. Marcus rushes to meet the helicopter and ferry the rescuers back to the crash site. His first passenger is rescue worker Don Schneck.
I made it to the airboat. He asked me, where are all the rescuers? And I said, this is it, let's go. He took us out into the glades to a point where he said, this is as far as I want to go because I don't want to run anybody over. And he said, there are bodies out here all over the place.
Don Schneck starts searching for survivors.
I approached the large object that I had seen at a small distance and realized it was the nose section of the aircraft.
He's amazed to discover that Captain Bob Loft has survived the crash.
He was in bad shape. He had lacerations, so I knew he had broken ribs. I could tell he was in shock, so I calmed him down, told him, I'm the only one here right now, but they're coming. Just hang in there.
I'm going to die.
He told me that, and I argued with him. Anything to keep anything going. It just made me feel so inadequate because it was just me. I turned around and I looked back towards Miami and thinking, where in the heck is everybody? And at that time when I looked, I must have seen 50 lights coming. And I went, thank God.
First Officer Bert Stockstill was killed during the crash. Captain Bob Loft soon dies at the scene. Angelo Donadeo and Don Repo have survived and are taken to hospital. In all, 77 people survived the crash. 99 people are killed. By dawn, all the wounded have been transported to Miami hospitals. Ron Infantino is one of the many who are struggling to survive.
Priest comes over and does the last rites. So right then I knew I was in bad shape. And it's a scary thought. And of course at that time I'm still asking for Lily, you know, had they seen her? It was such a madhouse there that night, you can imagine.
Lily. Where's Lily?
The crash is headline news around the world. It's the first ever jumbo jet to crash, and it produces the largest number of deaths in US civil aviation history. There's tremendous pressure on investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board to find out what happened.
It was an enormous puzzle because this was the newest, the most sophisticated, the best of the airliners. It apparently was in perfect working condition. So the NTSB perceived that this was going to be a very long investigation that involved multi-level potential problems.
The crash site itself is an important clue for investigators arriving at the scene. The trail of debris is enormously long. That suggests that the plane hit the swamp almost in the same nose-up position as it would while landing at an airport. Its descent was clearly slow and gradual. NTSB investigators have documented the final settings for many of the instruments in the cockpit. They discover that the autopilot was set to maintain an altitude of 2,000 feet. So why didn't it? Maintenance expert Angelo Donadeo is interviewed. All he can tell investigators is the crew was trying to fix a light bulb before the crash. Within days, the plane's 2 black boxes are recovered. Investigators hope they will provide some answers. Before they can extract the data, flight engineer Don Repo dies in hospital. Ron Infantino is given some devastating news of his own. The body of his wife Lily has been found under the plane's wing.
She's just a wonderful person. I was 27 years old, and she was the same age, and it was actually my first love.
Infantino is haunted by the memory of switching seats with Lily just before the crash.
They had swapped seats quite casually earlier during the flight when she had gotten up to go to the restroom. She was thrown into the swamp and drowned, and he lived.
The swamp proves both a blessing and a curse for survivors.
That's what saved most of the lives, actually. Because the plane broke up, it absorbed all the energy. And the mud absorbed it, and the plane just dispersed.
The swamp water is so thick with mud, it also clogs survivors' wounds, preventing many from bleeding to death. But there's a deadly new threat facing some survivors. Their wounds have become infected, contaminated by a deadly organism found in the black mud of the Everglades. The organism produces an infection called gas gangrene. It can kill a person in just 2 days. Gas gangrene can only be destroyed in a hyperbaric chamber. It's a pressurized container that gets filled with high levels of oxygen. The oxygen gets forced into the wounds and kills the bacteria. 8 of the surviving passengers are infected with gas gangrene. Hyperbaric chambers must be found for all of them. The only other way to save patients is to amputate the infected limb. Ron Infantino's arm is badly infected.
Doctor came in and says, well, we've diagnosed it as gas gangrene. He says, we got to take your arm off immediately or have to get you to a hyperbaric chamber. Unfortunately, he says, the only hyperbaric chamber is at Mercy Hospital, and that's all been taken advantage of.
Unless doctors can find a chamber soon, Infantino will lose his arm. While doctors search for a chamber for Ron Infantino, investigators examine what's left of the plane. They test its flight controls, engines, instruments, and its electrical and hydraulic systems.
The plane was virtually new. It was in perfect condition. There was no mechanical reason found that would have caused the crash.
In fact, some parts of the plane are in such good condition that the NTSB gives them back to Eastern Airlines so they can be installed on other airplanes in its fleet. An unused hyperbaric chamber is finally found for Ron Infantino at a Navy base in Panama City. He spends 40 hours in the chamber. The pressurized oxygen kills the bacteria and saves his life.
Gentlemen, we have 3 causes of the crash to explore.
A state-of-the-art jetliner plunged 2,000 feet without the crew noticing. Investigators know the plane was mechanically sound. They now focus on other possible reasons for the unobserved descent. At the top of the list is subtle incapacitation of the pilot. The autopsy of Captain Bob Loft has yielded a gruesome discovery. Captain Loft had a large, undetected tumor growing in his brain. It pressed into the part of his brain responsible for sight. Medical records reveal that between the ages of 50 and 52, vision in the pilot's left eye had rapidly deteriorated. Doctors believe that the captain may have had reduced peripheral vision. The tumor could have created blind spots. As his attention became focused on the malfunctioning light, he may not have noticed dire warnings on his altimeter. Investigators consider a stunning possibility. An undetected medical ailment may have contributed to the world's first jumbo jet disaster.
We're still at 2,000, right?
Hey, what's happening here?
Investigators learn what they can about Captain Bob Loft. They interview people who knew him and pore over his medical records.
The investigators heard that Captain Loft, so far as his family and friends knew, had perfect vision. He was an expert marksman. He shot doves, particularly, which are a very small target.
Loft's records show that he'd recently passed a medical in which he was issued corrective glasses for flying. But the evidence doesn't support the notion that his vision was dangerously impaired.
He was 55 years old, and who gets to be 55 without wearing reading glasses? Not many. Dr. Joe Davis, who did the autopsy, told me that even though the tumor was pressing on areas of his brain that control vision, there was no reason to think that it had yet begun to affect those. He felt it had nothing to do with the accident.
Investigators still don't know why Flight 401 started descending in the first place.
Put the autopilot on here. All right.
Could the autopilot, which was supposed to keep the plane at 2,000 feet, have malfunctioned? The plane's computers survived the crash. They're removed and examined. 11 days after the crash, the autopilot computers are installed on another TriStar. It flies the same route as Flight 401. The autopilot holds that plane at 2,000 feet. So why hadn't it on the night of the accident? Investigators will need to explore other leads to find out. There's another question that dogs this investigation. Why didn't the Miami Tower alert the crew that their plane was dropping? The world's first three-dimensional radar had recently been installed there. It meant that controller Charlie Johnson knew the location, altitude, and speed of Flight 401.
National 607 is declaring...
Investigators study recordings of Johnson's conversations
Fire and ambulance sent out right away.
and discover that on the night of the crash, it was another plane that demanded most of his attention. National Airlines Flight 607 was coming into land just ahead of Flight 401. That flight was having its own landing gear problems.
Emergency runway 9 will need fire and ambulance sent out right away.
As he focused on the emergency, Johnson handed Flight 401 over to another controller. But just as National 607 came in for its emergency landing, the other controller phoned Johnson and handed Flight 401 back to him.
Eastern Heavy's coming back to you. Unsafe nose gear.
No.
At the time, Flight 401 was already over the swamp. Johnson had 5 other planes to monitor. He was also dealing with the aftermath of his emergency landing.
National 607 has landed without incident. Trucks were deployed.
That's when he noticed that Flight 401's altitude had dropped to 900 feet.
The way the radars work, still to a certain extent this happens, but back then it was even worse.
Coast mode was a very well-known phenomenon. I mean, you might lose the target for 2 or 3 minutes in terms of the altitude reporting part of it, and it goes and gives you some weird altitude, and then boom, it's right back where it should be. But the controller didn't stop there, and this was really to his credit.
Johnson decided to make contact with Flight 401.
Eastern 401, how are things coming along?
Okay, we'd like to turn around and come back in.
Eastern 401, turn left, heading 180.
After that brief exchange, Johnson assumed there was no problem.
Eastern 401, how are things coming along? Okay.
Investigators conclude that at that moment, Controller Johnson was the only one who could see that the plane was losing altitude. Why hadn't he passed that information along to the crew? US government regulations for air traffic controllers provide the answer. It simply wasn't part of a controller's job.
At the time of the crash, the FAA required approach controllers to maintain a separation of the airplanes. It did not give them a duty to maintain the altitude of the airliner with regard to the ground.
Now investigators try to determine how the plane's own warning system failed to alert pilots to their growing danger. The L-1011 is equipped with an alarm that sounds if the plane goes 250 feet above or below the altitude selected by the pilots. As investigators replay the tape from the black box, they clearly hear that alarm sounding in the cockpit as the plane passed through 1,750 feet.
Did you hear that? How did they miss it?
Investigators closely examine the cockpit transcript to try to understand how the alarm was missed.
Put it in the wrong way, huh?
Swear to me.
Investigators noticed that just before the alarm sounded in the cockpit, warning the crew that the plane is too low, both pilots were completely absorbed with the landing gear light. The conversation also tells investigators that the flight engineer was below in the hellhole. The warning chime came out of a speaker at his workstation. Investigators begin to realize that the two pilots were unable to hear a perfectly audible alarm because they were focused so entirely on solving another problem.
That chime, which is clearly heard on the cockpit voice recorder, was not registering in the minds of all the men on that flight deck. Not because they weren't trying to pay attention, but because they were tunneled in on this one problem. That's what we do as humans.
Investigators now focus on crew distraction as a likely cause of this accident. Several instruments would have displayed the decreasing altitude.
The major question was, why were the pilots so preoccupied that they were not looking at the instrument panel?
They had to look at the human beings. They had to look at the interaction. They had to look at why no one was paying attention to the airplane as it began to creep out of 2,000 feet. That was scary territory in 1972.
Investigators interview a number of pilots and make a startling discovery. Pilots admitted that they placed a lot of trust in the modern new autopilots flying their planes. They may have become overly dependent on the technology.
Put the autopilot on here. Right.
Investigators suspect that the Eastern crew was so confident in their autopilot that they didn't monitor their instruments as closely as they should have.
Now, see if you can get that light out.
Once the autopilot was on, none of the pilots paid attention to actually flying the plane.
Still got to find out why that plane went down.
Investigators still haven't determined the most crucial piece of information. If the autopilot was working, why did the plane dive into the swamp?
We did something to the altitude? What?
The pilot's conversation clearly shows that they hadn't deliberately started descending.
We're still at 2,000, right?
Hey, what's happening here?
So why did it happen? The answer comes in a dramatic form when the NTSB conducts a public hearing in Miami 2 months after the crash. Before the hearing, an Eastern Airlines pilot named Daniel Gellert wrote the chairman of the NTSB offering to testify on his own behalf. He had flown the TriStar L-1011 and noticed some abnormalities.
The world of airline piloting in 1972 was hostile to a pilot going around his chief pilot and his airline and raising his hand to the NTSB and saying, hey, wait a minute, I've had an experience too, because airlines were far more insular than they are today.
Gellert tells the hearing that during a recent flight on a TriStar, he had accidentally dropped a map on the cockpit floor. As he bent down to pick it up, he nudged his control column. He noticed immediately that the plane's autopilot had been affected. The part of the autopilot controlling altitude had been turned off. The NTSB discovers that Gellert's experience is shared by others. In fact, 17 days after the accident, Eastern Airlines tacked a notice onto a company bulletin board and also mailed it to all of its TriStar pilots. The bulletin warned against accidentally bumping the control wheel.
One of the things that we built into all the modern jetliners and airliners is simply a pressure switch. So if you need to take over right now, you don't want to be wasting time down here on the panel turning the autopilot off. You just grab it and the autopilot goes away.
The flight data recorder tells investigators the precise moment that the plane's altitude started to drop. It was 11:37 and 8 seconds. By studying the voice recorder transcript, investigators can tell what was happening in the cockpit at that exact time.
Hey, get down there and see if that damn nose wheel is down.
By turning to speak to the flight engineer, investigators believe that Captain Loft bumped his control wheel. He did it with just enough pressure to disengage that part of the autopilot that had been controlling the plane's altitude. Without anyone realizing it, a simple nudge of the control wheel started a gradual descent. On a dark, moonless night, the pilots had no visual cues to tell them they were falling.
It was determined that occasionally, with just a soft bump, an autopilot had been disengaged.
So before the crash, it wasn't part of the training?
A training director for Eastern Airlines eventually reveals that before the Everglades crash, pilots were never taught that a bump could disengage the autopilot. The NTSB comes to a sobering conclusion. The plane crash was due to pilot error. The crew was distracted. They mishandled the plane's sophisticated automation, and they hadn't been properly trained.
Eastern 401 was a pivotal accident in aviation safety history, and we really didn't know this for about 10 or 15 years in terms of the true import of what it did to us in focusing our attention on the fact that the way we handle things in a cockpit was not only not correct, but it was dangerous.
Investigators also make a disheartening find. When the nose gear indicator light assembly is examined, they discover that a light bulb inside is burnt out.
Go ahead and throw them out.
Flight 401's landing gear was locked. The plane could have landed. The only piece of the plane that failed was a $12 light bulb. The full legacy of Flight 401 will take years to unfold. It will ultimately alter how pilots are trained and how accidents are investigated. But first, the tale of Eastern Airlines Flight 401 will take a very bizarre twist. As far as the NTSB is concerned, the investigation into Eastern Airlines Flight 401 is over. Several recommendations were laid out to prevent similar accidents. Those include new regulations instructing air traffic controllers to warn pilots when they're getting too close to the ground. But 4 years later, it became clear there was a bigger lesson to be learned from Eastern Airlines Flight 401. In 1977, two 747s collided on a runway in Tenerife on the Canary Islands. It was the deadliest plane crash of all time.
And we're now at takeoff. Okay, stand by for takeoff. I will call you. 1736, report when runway clear.
That accident was caused by a string of miscommunications in the cockpit.
Is he not your off now? Is he not your off? Upon America.
Investigators established that 70% of crashes were due to pilot error.
Both of these accidents, Tenerife and 401, what you see is crews dedicated to doing a good job, but not realizing that they're human, not realizing how many things can go wrong if you don't appreciate how human beings fail.
By the late 1970s, NASA began to explore a new behavioral science designed to reduce pilot error.
And pilots be on the lookout for any different behavior when we acquire...
It's called Crew Resource Management, or CRM.
Crew resource management simply means that we're not going to have one pilot leading and everybody else following. It means that the captain has to be a leader and listen to and interact with his subordinate crew members, and the subordinate crew members have to speak up.
Decades later, Flight 401 is taught in aviation courses around the world as a textbook example of poor CRM.
The problem was that we did not teach Bob Loft or Stockstill or any of these folks at the time that when something goes wrong, the commander's first responsibility is to maintain aircraft control and either do it himself or assign somebody.
We're up to 2,000. You want me to fly, bro?
What frequency did he want us on board?
128.6.
I'll talk to him.
On Flight 401, Captain Loft did not clarify who should be doing what. Instead, all three crew members worked on the same problem.
Bob, could you just jiggle the light?
It's gotta come out a little bit and then snap in.
With the co-pilot flying, the captain commanding from the left seat, you already had cross purposes here.
It's right above that red one, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't get at it from here.
And you had a light quadrant the captain couldn't quite reach, and the co-pilot could, but the co-pilot is flying the airplane. You've just set them up for a major problem, and guess what? Systemically, we never taught them what to do.
Today, CRM also trains flight crews not to be intimidated by one crew member's mood.
You got a handkerchief or something so I can get a little better grip on this? Anything I can do it with?
Get down there and see if that damn
This
thing...
won't come out, Bob.
So if the leader is having a problem, in this case with a light bulb,
okay. You got it sideways then.
and he's really irritated at it, and the co-pilot has now made the problem worse. The co-pilot's not going to be happy with himself over that.
I don't know what the hell's holding that damn thing in there.
Don Repo is not going to be happy that he got downstairs to try to solve the problem, and he couldn't see anything, and he's got to come up and report that.
I don't see it.
They're all tense.
It's not lined up.
I can't see it.
And when you get a crew like that tense, it's not to turn around to the captain and say you shouldn't have done that. But this is part of the evolution of what air safety has now learned and been able to teach so many other industries.
The enduring legacy of Flight 401 is the delegation of specific tasks in the cockpit. The result is fewer crashes. There was also much more bizarre fallout from this crash. For a while, it seemed that the crew of Flight 401 was haunting other Eastern Airlines flights. For some time after the crash, flight crews and passengers report seeing lifelike apparitions of Flight 401's crew. Many of the ghost sightings were on aircraft fitted with recovered parts from Flight 401. The ghost stories spread quickly. One book devoted entirely to those stories suggests that the ghosts were there to protect passengers and crew from further mishap.
The official reaction at Eastern Airlines to these ghost stories was one of absolute eye-rolling denial in public, and in private, a certain bit of panic.
There are so many ghost sightings that eventually Eastern Airlines removes Flight 401's cannibalized plane parts from all other aircraft. None of those who survived the crash will ever forget the horror they witnessed in the Everglades that night. And 35 years after their ordeal, many of them return to that swamp to finally recognize the heroic efforts of Bob Marcus.
We're here today to recognize and to say thank you.
Many of the ones who lived because Robert Marcus was there with his airboat. He saw them drowning and decided that the thing that he could do would be to save the ones he could save. Robert Marcus was the kind of person that I hope that all of us ultimately would be if we were confronted with that sort of thing, but he drew on some special courage to do what he did. He was one of the true heroes of the crash.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain. I hope you had a good...
Captain Stefan Rasmussen has been in love with flying all of his life.
I got my first idea of flying when I was a young boy.
After learning to fly in the Air Force, Rasmussen joined Scandinavian Airlines.
He seemed to be the one who really enjoyed his job.
On December the 27th, 1991, he's in command of a state-of-the-art DC-9. The flight will take him to the very edge of his abilities as his engines fail and his plane falls out of the sky.
I was in a nightmare.
Stockholm, Scandinavian 751, we are crashing into the ground now.
What caused the most baffling accident in Sweden's history is nothing investigators could have imagined. What they finally uncover will strain Rasmussen's lifelong relationship with airplanes to the breaking point.
I really felt that I didn't trust the aircraft.
Mayday, Mayday.
It's 2 days after Christmas. Stockholm Arlanda Airport is a mess of snow, slush, and ice. Passengers boarding a mid-morning Scandinavian Airlines flight to Copenhagen are finding the cabin very uncomfortable.
It was really warm inside the plane when we entered because there had been heaters on during night. And I saw when the passengers embarked, they also wanted to take off jackets and shoes, and because it was like a sauna.
Is it possible to turn the heat down now?
"34-year-old Ulf Sedermark has been with the airline for 4 years. He's the first officer on today's flight.
It was a light snowfall. Temperature was just below freezing and light winds. We were going to fly Stockholm to Copenhagen and then to Warsaw, back to Copenhagen and down to Barcelona that day. It would be quite a long working day.
Stefan Rasmussen has just finished an exterior check of the plane. The Danish pilot is in command this morning.
In those over 12, almost 13,000 hours I've been sitting in an aircraft, I always felt that I put the aircraft and back on like a rucksack. And when we took lift on the wings, we melted together.
The plane Rasmussen is strapping on today is a nearly new DC-9, easily identifiable by its 2 rear engines.
By now, everyone should know that door stays open.
Great.
Even in the days before terrorist threats, flying with the cockpit door open is unusual. It's just one way Rasmussen has endeared himself to the crews and passengers he flies with.
I always had my cabin door open because I found out that if we had the door open and they could see that there were a human being in there, they'd trust you.
For me, it felt good that the door was open. It just feels like you have a connection more than if the door is closed.
The winter weather has delayed this flight, But Rasmussen won't compromise safety for schedule.
Where are we now with the de-icing?
The wings aren't quite done. They've done the underside. Now they're doing the top.
Thank you.
Under Captain Rasmussen's instructions, the ground crew had already de-iced the plane once. Now they're giving it another pass.
And it took a while, but they had trouble getting rid of the snow on top of the wing. So we were slightly late for our pushback out to our runway.
For Captain Per Holmberg, this kind of delay is routine business. He flies DC-9s for the airline. A passenger this morning, he is scheduled to command another flight later that day.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain. I hope you had a good Christmas. We're just getting our wings cleared as we've had a bit of snow overnight. And when that's finished, we're ready for takeoff for some warmer weather. I handpicked the airline's best cabin crew to take care of you today. We all hope you have a nice flight.
Finally, Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751 is cleared to proceed. There are buildups of snow that the crew must avoid on the way to the runway.
Would have been nice of them to clear the snow.
Oh, that would have made it too easy. Approaching holding point, runway 08.
Roger, Scandinavian 751. You are cleared for takeoff from runway 08.
Spoilers?
Armed.
Auto brake, takeoff and armed. Runway update performed. Checklist completed.
Set power.
Despite the winter conditions, the takeoff is routine.
V1, rotate.
Gear up.
Gear up selected.
When Wolfie reached out for the gear, I heard things which was different.
Just 25 seconds into the flight, as the plane is climbing, there is a problem.
When you hear things that are different from the normally, you get suspicious. There was a really big roar in the aircraft, almost like an explosion. Boom!
There was another banging noise that I just thought, what is that? I had never heard that before.
It's obvious the source of the noise is the right engine.
It sounds serious. I believe it's a compressor stall.
I took the right throttle and moved a little back, but there it really became strange because the engine performance increased when I reduced the throttle. It's like if you're sitting in your car and you're turning your wheel to the left and the car is driving to the right, you get confused.
We're not supposed to call into cockpit now. And then I thought, this is an emergency, I have to call the captain.
But Captain Rasmussen doesn't respond to the call. He's too busy trying to figure out what's going wrong with his plane.
I couldn't see anything on the instrument. They were quite stable and a quite normal range, no problem. But I could hear those roaring every second.
He searches for telltale signs of attack or structural failure.
And I looked up at the cabin pressure, because if you have a bomb or a freight door or anything which is ripped off, that'll give a decompression.
In the cabin, pressure levels are stable. But the crew has other concerns.
I saw the smoke and it smelled burnt.
What should we do about this?
Just 3,200 feet above the ground, the emergency escalates. The right engine quits.
When we have flown a little over 1 minute, the right engine just went down. I had a very, very short moment of thinking that I was in a nightmare and just dreaming. I was confused. I was really confused.
2 seconds later, the left engine also quits. The plane is now powerless.
One engine dropped, and then another engine dropped. I thought that it wasn't true. It wasn't true. It wasn't real.
Less than a minute and a half after takeoff, the DC-9 begins falling from the sky.
And after that, it was complete silence. And I think that was the worst moment for me. Just being in the air, and it's so quiet. It was like a bird just sailing through the sky. So then I started to get scared.
Engine relay.
As the pilots try to restart their engines, things get even worse. The left engine erupts in flames.
I saw the exhaust gas temperature was rising rapidly. Max temperature was around 680 degrees Celsius, and I saw it go above 800.
A fire in the engine could spread to the rest of the plane.
Should I pull?
If Sædemark pulls the fire extinguisher in the left engine, he will never be able to restart it. He pulls the handle to put out the fire. From his seat, Captain Per Holmberg can see that the crew is in trouble. Flight 751 is now falling at a rate of 1,200 feet per minute. But air traffic controllers at the Stockholm airport have no idea the plane is in trouble.
Arlanda, Stockholm, Scandinavian 751.
Good morning, SK751. Climb to flight level 180. We have problems with our engines, please.
We need to go back to Arlanda.
751, roger. Turn right, heading to here.
Suddenly, the radio goes dead. A result of the failed engines. Only the right engine can provide power, but it's now spinning too slowly to generate electricity for the instruments.
Without the engine, you don't have any propulsion, so the only energy you have is your height.
With time running out, the pilots of Flight 751 must find a way to restart the right engine, or else crash into the countryside below. Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751 is now falling from the sky at 20 feet per second.
How can I help?
Captain Per Holmberg, who boarded the flight as a passenger, becomes part of the flight crew.
He came out in the cockpit and he said, "Is there anything I can help you with?" I don't think I even said yes. I just said, "Start the APU."
If the auxiliary power unit can be launched, it will bring back the radio and instruments.
So I just handed him the emergency checklist and started focus on controlling the flight to see that we were maintaining the speed and the attitude and that we were wings level. He managed to start the auxiliary power unit, so my flight instruments were supplied from that.
But for some reason, Captain Rasmussen's instruments don't come back online.
He managed to fly the plane basically by feel.
Power is also restored to the cabin, but it's small comfort to passengers who now know they're in extreme danger. Stockholm Air Traffic Control instructs the pilots to return to the airport.
Scandinavian 751, are you able to turn right, heading 090, radar vectoring for 0-1?
But the plane is now just 1,600 feet from the ground. And First Officer Sædemark's attempts to resuscitate it aren't working.
Roger, we are maintaining our heading, but we are trying to restart our engines.
Making a 180-degree turn back to Stockholm could be catastrophic.
I really had the feeling that if I turned the aircraft at that time, we would have stalled.
When you're turning back, you are losing a lot of energy. So the most safe thing to do is actually just to go straight, keep your wings level. That means that you will use less energy of your altitude, so you can maintain your speed.
You can maintain 2,000 feet.
We are not able to maintain 2,000 feet. We are descending. We are at 1,600 feet and descending.
Holmberg wants Rasmussen to focus his attention on finding a landing spot.
Look straight ahead. Look straight ahead.
He was screaming at Stefan, just look straight ahead and watch the flight path.
Prepare for on-ground emergency. On-ground emergency!
Bend down! Bend down! Bend down! So we shouted bend down I don't know how many times. Bend down, bend down, bend down.
Keep your seatbelts fastened.
While passengers brace, Rasmussen considers where to land his plane.
Look straight ahead.
And I had an idea that on the northern direction could bring us out to the Baltic Sea, which was at that time frozen. And that's an excellent runway.
But instead, he finds himself gliding powerlessly over a dense forest.
I saw that green area and I saw that little light spot in the middle of the forest, but that really looked short.
Steer right, steer right.
Just 500 feet above the ground, Captain Rasmussen lifts the plane's nose to slow it down, hoping to soften the crash landing.
Pine trees from the top there look very soft. I could use the trees as almost like a pillow.
Should I lower the landing gear?
Yes, gear down.
Bend down and hold your knees.
I prepared myself for a hard impact. If it's an emergency landing, we have no engines, I just thought this is going to be a hard landing.
Stockholm, Scandinavian 751. We are crashing into the ground now.
I wasn't afraid until we were flying into the trees. Then I was scared, and I knew we were not going to make it.
I didn't thought I should die. I knew I should die. I made my prayer to God. And then, a moment after, we were in a strange world.
After we have come to a complete stop, I feel the smell of airplane fuel. I thought, okay, we're gonna explode. And I look around and I see the snow because there was a big crack in the airplane fuselage just in front of the aft galley. And you could just walk down on the ground.
Everything was quiet, and I woke up. It might only have been a split second or so.
I was afraid that my spine was broken, that I wouldn't be able to walk again. So I remember I was sitting there and I was moving my toes and my feet just to see if I could have control over them. I had a pain in my hand because I had broken a bone in my hand, and I was bleeding heavily from my forehead, so I was trying to get clear of all the blood that was coming down in my eyes. And Stefan told me that we had to get out of the aircraft.
After plowing through 125 meters of pine forest, the pilot's fear is now that the broken aircraft could catch fire. Dozens of passengers escape through the breaks in the fuselage walls. But Captain Per Holmberg has been knocked unconscious by the crash.
It all went so fast that no one could take in what happened. So I tried to stay with the group of passengers I had there. But I just knew the feeling also that we had to wait a long time for the rescue teams.
Help will be here soon.
Fortunately, no fire materializes. But because they removed their winter clothing while boarding the sweltering plane, many passengers are starting to freeze.
Most people were just standing in their shirts, t-shirts, very, very little clothes. Few didn't even have shoes on.
They are now at risk from hypothermia.
So I focused on being caring. Maybe I did it for my own sake also. I needed a hug also. It was comforting to like comfort someone else.
The wreckage of Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751 lies just 15 kilometers northeast of Stockholm Arlanda Airport. The fuselage has broken into 3 pieces. In the chaos of the moment, nobody knows how many people have been killed in the crash. Rescuers arrive within minutes and attend to the freezing survivors. They pull Captain Per Holmberg from the cabin, unconscious.
He landed on the wall at impact, and he skidded down on the wall to the floor at impact. So he was quite badly damaged. He cut his eyelid, and he also got his collarbone that was broken off, so his shoulder was in front of him.
92 of the passengers have sustained injuries. Only 8 are considered serious. But when the crew conducts a head count, they're stunned to learn that out of the 129 people who boarded Flight 751, not a single one was killed in the crash.
Everyone survived. It was like a shock just to take in. Wow, that was a fantastic comment.
This was the happiest captain in the world. We were all alive. It was a great moment.
Reporters break the remarkable story to the world as the Swedish Accident Investigation Board, or SAIB, takes charge of the case. Scandinavian Airlines alerts its own investigators, dispatching Tori Hultgren to head up its team.
It's most unusual that the plane crashes in a wooded area and everybody survives, and I've never heard of it before. The police kept everybody off the site itself. It was a cordon around the aircraft about 100 meters. We had a complete aircraft, nothing had burned, and we had lots of good data.
Henrik Ullander from the SAIB gets to work on the evidence.
And we all started to plan the documentation of the accident site, which means photographing all the final approach through the wood, you know, and to take photos of all the parts that were spread all over the place.
The 2 black boxes, which record cockpit conversations and store flight data, are recovered immediately. Investigators speak to survivors. Everyone tells a similar story.
Would you mind telling me what you saw and heard?
Loud, booming sounds from the engines moments after the flight began, smoke in the cabin, and finally the entire loss of power and an engine on fire.
You have a twin-engine aircraft, and you are really not supposed to lose both engines at the same time.
The Pratt & Whitney turbofan engines are sent to a Scandinavian Airlines repair shop for closer examination. Investigators are eager to speak with Captain Rasmussen about the incident. But to their dismay, Scandinavian Airlines takes him to the media first.
The first question, what did you think when both engines refused to function? It'll take me an awful long time to tell you all that.
The normal case is that the key witnesses, like the crew and so on, should be kept in quarantine until they meet the investigation board.
European media celebrate Captain Stefan Rasmussen as a hero for landing the DC-9 without engine power. But investigators consider the possibility that he or his co-pilot had made errors that caused the crisis in the first place.
The honor and the glory always rests with the captain, but so does also the mishaps.
I knew that being a person where in the spotlight of the press would be a quite different situation. And I said to myself, the only thing you can do now is to give them all their story and then pray that they will find the reason.
Lars Lindberg is an investigative representative for the Swedish Airlines Pilot Association. He examines the wreckage for signs of mechanical or structural failure.
We knew both engines had failed for some reason, so we was concerned what was the background for something like that to happen. The first time I saw the engines in the workshop, I was surprised.
Is this all they found?
There was a number of parts that were completely missing, and this was something we hadn't seen before to this extent.
To find out what happened, investigators must find the missing pieces, which now lies somewhere in snow-covered fields and forests. A close study of Scandinavian Airlines Flight 751's engines reveals exactly which pieces are missing.
Part of this aircraft was shedding parts from both engines. And then what you do is you go further in and you document everything and you try to find the root cause and see how it all comes together.
The missing pieces could hold the key to discovering why both of the plane's engines quit within seconds of each other. But they could be anywhere along the 15-kilometer route the aircraft covered during its short flight. They must be found. Investigators use the flight data recorder to map the plane's journey and determine where engine parts may have fallen. After scouring the snow-covered fields along the plane's path, the recovery team finds 500 fragments. Just a fraction of what's missing. Many are very badly damaged. Some of the titanium blades actually seem to have been on fire.
You had this titanium fire inside both engines, both the right and the left engine. And this titanium fire is a very unique occurrence. It's requiring very, very high pressure and very high temperature for a titanium blade to catch fire.
Investigators dig deeper into the cause of the engine trouble. The left engine's fuel line is badly dented. It was obviously hit by a fast-moving piece of metal inside the engine. The impact caused it to rupture.
This part got dislodged, it went out and hit a fuel line, and that fuel line cracked, sprayed fuel onto the hot engine.
The engine was clearly coming apart during the flight.
That sounds serious.
The discovery explains the fire in the left engine and why so many pieces of it were found so far from the crash site. But investigators are left wondering why the engines broke up in the first place. A major clue comes from passenger and crew testimonies, which told of repeated booming noises before the left engine caught fire. The cockpit voice recorder picked up these sounds.
So you can hear that, and we could correlate that with when the damage occurred. You can see that on the flight data recorder.
The sounds are familiar to investigators and leave no doubt. The DC-9's engines began surging shortly after takeoff. Jet engines rely on a steady stream of air for combustion. A series of fans move incoming air through various stages of compression. But when that flow is disrupted, fuel at the rear of the engines ignites violently and shoots forward.
That's a surge. You can have a small surge and you can have a large surge. And you can have the complete surge on the whole engine.
Sounds serious.
This surge process was very violent, so after a very short time, we had an aircraft with 2 engines that could not be restarted, that didn't generate any thrust. Basically, you had a giant glider at that point.
A closer look at the fan blades from the front of the engines explains why they were surging. They're badly dented. The damage would have prevented them from effectively directing air to the rear of the engines.
This damage that twisted the fan blade started this process. You got this disturbed air in the fan, you got this rotating fan stall that then triggered this whole breakdown, the compressor surge, and then the whole process that led up to the dual engine failures.
But what exactly mangled the blades? There are ways to tell.
If it comes from a stone, rubber, ice, and so on, you can see it on the shape of the damage. The ice causes very specific damages. It's sort of like a soft dent.
Analysis of dent patterns on the fan blades is conclusive. They were struck by ice. Now investigators want to find out where the ice could have come from.
Weather data for the 24 hours leading up to the crash.
They know Stockholm had been hit with rain and snow in the hours before Flight 751 took off.
It was a situation with the temperature around 0 degrees. It was a drizzle, snow, rain in the morning.
They learned that the DC-9 arrived from Zurich the night before, with the fuel tanks more than half full.
They had quite a large amount of reserve fuel, of diversion fuel, in their wings. The fuel in the wing tanks were close to minus 20 degrees Celsius.
The conditions that night were ideal for the formation of clear ice on the wing surface.
And here you had very, very cold fuel on the top wing skin. And as the temperature dropped during the night, it went to snow and rain, and finally snow. So there was a layer cake. Ice at the bottom, slush, and snow on top. About 10 inches total on top of the wings in the morning.
Responsibility for de-icing the plane ultimately falls on the captain. Rasmussen insists he was aware of the overnight buildup. Investigators wonder if the pilot did all he could to ensure his plane was completely free of ice. Rasmussen claims he instructed technicians to de-ice the plane thoroughly.
I didn't walk around with the aircraft. It was cold, it was frosty.
Noticing that there was still frost on the wings, the head technician ordered a second round of de-icing.
I was really convinced that the aircraft was clean. And so was he,
Where are we now with the de-icing? The wings aren't quite done. They've done the underside.
The cockpit voice recorder backs up Rasmussen's testimony.
They've got it good and clean under the wings? Yes.
They de-iced the aircraft once and looked at it and I said, once more. And they de-iced us the second time.
In fact, a total of 850 liters of fluid was sprayed on the aircraft. But the fluid may have been faulty, not potent enough to melt the thick layer of ice that had accumulated on the wings overnight. Technicians test samples of the fluid used to de-ice Flight 751.
We found no discrepancies. There was nothing wrong with any of the fluids used.
But when investigators interview the maintenance crew that worked on the plane, they begin wondering if the de-icing team was thorough enough in their efforts. The ground crew insists that after they sprayed the wing, it appeared to be clean. But that appearance was deceptive.
It looked perfect, because the clear ice on top of the fuel tanks, you cannot see the clear ice.
A technician inspected the front of the wing and found no ice. He couldn't have known that there was ice further back, out of his reach.
No provisions for stairs or anything that he could use to get up on the wing at the de-icing platform. It looked shiny and nice, couldn't see any ice on it, but still there was maybe an inch of ice on top of the wing when the aircraft took off.
As soon as the plane took flight, the ice became a problem.
On this aircraft, the engines are positioned behind the wings. And as the aircraft rotated and the wings bent in order to take the weight of the aircraft, this ice in the wing roots loosened and it sucked right into the engine.
The ice damaged the fan blades at the front of the engines and ultimately caused them to begin surging.
Nobody really expected that this would happen, or could happen, but it did.
When ice breaks off the wings during flight, it doesn't pose a problem for most aircraft. But the placement of a DC-9's engines leaves them more susceptible to being struck. The Pratt & Whitney engines on Flight 751 were designed to withstand this type of ice ingestion. Something else must explain the disaster. Investigators know that the wrong reaction by a pilot can make surges worse. They comb through the flight data to see what these pilots did when the emergency struck.
The first thing you do when you have a surge, if you recognize it as a surge, is that you reduce power.
Captain Rasmussen claims he did just that.
Of course, you just pull the throttle back, and then you have the balance between the incoming fuel and incoming air. And that was actually what I did.
But the flight data recorder tells a different story.
Why is the engine power increasing?
It clearly shows that in the moments after the surge, thrust was reduced, but then seconds later was increased to beyond full power.
Yeah, it didn't add up because the RPM was increasing to 110%, and the throttle position was moving. It shouldn't be. The only thing that could move the throttles in clamp was the pilot's hand.
But if Rasmussen didn't push the throttles forward, something else did. It would explain the captain's confusion as his engines began to surge.
As a pilot, when you've gone through the training, you've done all your emergency training, you've been through the simulator, and now you have a system that is doing something that you don't expect, it's very confusing.
Despite their relentless efforts, investigators can find no possible explanation for the increase in thrust.
The frustrating part with the investigation was that we could not figure out why the system did what it did.
Then, almost 2 months after the accident, the plane's manufacturer provides the answer. The culprit is something called automatic thrust restoration.
It's brand new. It automatically increases the thrust during the climb.
Swedish authorities learned that automatic thrust restoration, or ATR, was recently introduced as a safety feature on Scandinavian Airlines planes. It existed because the FAA had discovered some pilots were throttling back considerably while taking off and landing to reduce noise over residential neighborhoods. The ATR was designed to make it impossible for them to throttle back to dangerous levels.
So as soon as he powered back, the system kicked in.
Investigators learned that when Rasmussen reduced power to clear his engine surge, the system read this as a dangerously low power setting and pushed the throttles forward. The increased thrust made the surging worse until the engines destroyed themselves. The investigation concludes that the pilots had taken the right steps to clear the surge and prevent the catastrophe. But the computer code which governs the ATR undermined their efforts.
A strip of zeros and ones caused the throttles to move and caused the engines that were stalling because they already got too much fuel, got even more fuel. And they went into self-destruct, both engines. In a few seconds, they were both totally destroyed.
The system was so new to Scandinavian Airlines that nobody there had even heard of it.
And it was confusing for everyone because we didn't know about the system. We didn't have information on the system. SAS didn't know the system existed on their aircraft.
We hadn't bought that modification. And it was sneaked in via another system.
Because he didn't know about the ATR, Rasmussen was unaware that he could only save his plane by switching it off. News that the automatic thrust restoration was responsible for the accident proved both a blessing and a curse for Captain Rasmussen. It eliminated any notion that he had made a mistake.
When I got that message, I was really released. It was like winning in the lottery. It was, because I was so happy. Because then I could explain why I was in that total cone of confusion.
But the fallout would ultimately destroy a love affair and end a career. On October the 20th, 1993, the Swedish Accident Investigation Board releases its report on the crash of Flight 751. It determines that the actions of Captain Rasmussen and First Officer Cedermark contributed to the safe outcome of this incident. And although investigators question Captain Per Holmberg's decision to enter the cockpit in the first place, they do praise his contribution.
This crew flew until they stood still on the ground. They never gave up. They never gave up. They didn't give an inch.
The investigators put much of the blame for the accident on Scandinavian Airlines because their procedures for checking for clear ice were inadequate.
I believe it's a compressor stall.
The report also condemns the fact that the pilots didn't know about the automatic thrust restoration and how it would act in a surge situation.
If the ATR system hadn't been there, if the trolls hadn't moved forward, there wouldn't have been an accident.
It was a bit strange that we didn't have all the documentation available to us, so we knew what we could expect if something like this would happen.
In the wake of the crash, Scandinavian Airlines started training its pilots how to use the ATR system. They also implemented steps to ensure airplanes don't take off with clear ice on the wings.
We changed all the procedures, we provided stairs for the mechanic, and we made it a requirement to go up on top of the wing and touch it with your hand to verify after de-icing.
After healing from his injuries, First Officer Ulf Cedermark returned to the cockpit.
I didn't feel the responsibility that I wouldn't be able to do my job again. Whatever happens, I know that I still can see things for what they are. And I still love doing my job, and if something bad happens, I can deal with it.
But Stefan Rasmussen's return proved far more difficult.
Set power.
After I'd had from a high-skilled psychologist, we talked about getting in the air again. He knew that would be a hard decision to take.
Gear up. Fire drill.
After time in the simulator, Rasmussen couldn't regain confidence in his plane.
Sorry, guys.
In a disaster situation, in a crisis, is that you have optimized the teamwork between man and machine. I really felt that I didn't trust the aircraft.
Pilots tends to take the responsibility for all that went wrong. Too much of the glory and also too much of the responsibility.
With the right counseling, about 90% of pilots involved in an accident are able to continue flying. Even though Captain Rasmussen received treatment, His career ended with the crash of Flight 751.
Taking that decision to leave aviation as pilot was like having your highest love and come to that conclusion that you have to kill her. I had many hours, many missions of happiness in an aircraft. And I loved my passengers, I loved my aircraft so much, so I said, that's it. I never regret it, never. And I think I was right.